Hi, I'm Jeannette Mare, and I'm on the chopping block at visceralchange.org.
All right. So we're here with Jeannette Mare. Jeannette, how you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay. I'm actually super excited to get a chance to really sit down with you. Um, you may not see this in yourself, but you are actually a Tucson staple. I mean, would you agree with
Oh my goodness,
that?
that's staple. I guess I depends on what you mean by staple. I have been here a long time.
Sure.
I've been in this community a long time, and am fortunate to have been involved with some really cool people doing really amazing things. So Tucson is my beloved city.
Oh, for sure. And you're not from here, are you? Born and raised?
Well, we moved here when I was a little kid, so
Okay.
I would say I'm one of those almost natives.
Gotcha.
I was 9 when we moved here, fourth
Where'd you
grade.
where'd you move from?
We moved from Iowa. My dad is a veterinarian, a
Oh,
research
okay.
vet, university vet, and he was at Iowa State and then came to the University of Arizona.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Got it. Iowa State Hawks? Jayhawks? No.
Cyclones,
Oh, my fault. It's
right?
been a while. It's been a
I
while.
Yeah, Iowa State in Ames, Iowa.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. Man, no sports has been killing me in terms of that.
I'm having to search my brain because I was not really paying attention at that time.
Gotcha. So Jeanette, let's jump right into it. You are the founder and now Chief Kindness Officer of Ben's Bells, which is a fantastic entity, organization, company. Everything that you all do really touches the hearts of, I think, many people and has a potential. And I only say potential because I know it's very localized in what you do, but it has a potential to really stretch globally. And I really hope I get to see that happen, maybe even sooner than later. I'd love for you to just tell us a little bit about Ben's Bells and what it is, how you came to found it, and where it is today.
Absolutely. So Ben's Bells was born out of tremendous grief.
Mm,
Ben is my son, the namesake of Ben's Bells. He is my
okay.
son, and he's my second son. And we had this sort of little life going. And just before his third birthday, he died suddenly of a virus, of croup virus. And so we went from having this you know sort of regular life, I guess, to being thrust into this just tremendous grief experience overnight, literally overnight.
Sure.
And losing your child, it feels like something that you can't. Let me speak for myself. It felt like something I could not survive,
Mhm.
and I didn't know how to survive it. I didn't know how to put one foot in front of the other and like go grocery shopping and take care of my other son and just do all these things. I was so devastated. But fortunately for me, I was surrounded by a lot of people who were really willing to brave that pain. Some people needed to stay away from me, but some people were able to come in and support me and my family. And through their kindness, I just started understanding kindness in a really different way.
Yeah.
I think that we sometimes think of kind as just means nice, like just be nice, keep things comfortable, keep
Right.
things looking pretty, right? But that's not what it was. Kindness was uh, profound and strong and messy and willing to sit in the pain. And I started understanding kindness in a different way. And honestly, kindness was saving my life during that
Mm,
time. And so, just like probably every parent who experiences the death of a child, you have this drive almost to do something to remember your child.
sure.
And so I came up with this idea, and that's a long story, but we
Mm,
probably don't want to get into how the idea came up. But this idea of Ben's bells, and Ben's bells are these beautiful ceramic wind chimes, and the pieces of them are made by community members. But it started in my garage. So we started with just friends and family coming together and making these bells. And then on the first anniversary of Ben's death, we hung out 400 of them all around Tucson.
400.
And the tag said, "You have found a Ben's bell, take it home and remember to spread kindness."
Nice.
And we didn't hide them. We just hung them, right? So you would be, on the river path or at the park or on a bus bench or
Sure.
whatever. There's this beautiful piece of handmade art. And we had a little sort of makeshift website that we made, and that was going to be the end of it. But what happened was the people who found bells had stories to tell about why that bell was significant.
Sure.
And we hung out 400 bells, and of course we didn't get 400 stories back, but we did get, a lot of stories back. And the stories were so diverse and so, it struck people in such a way that honestly, I was flabbergasted. I
Wow.
couldn't believe what it touched on.
Yeah.
And really what it touched on, I guess, shouldn't be surprising, but what it touched on was that there are so many ways that people are hurting, and so many ways that people want to express what they're going through, and so many ways that people want to support each other.
Right.
And so from that experience, we just realized that we had something that people were interested in, and so we kept it going. And of course, I had a whole other career at this point. I was faculty at the University of Arizona at that time. But this thing just sort of had a life of its own. Well,
Yeah.
it didn't have a life of its own. We worked really hard,
Of
but
course.
it did have like a momentum, and the community was really involved.
Yeah.
And it grew and grew and grew, and now it's 18 years later, and we've hung out over 70,000 Ben's bells. But really, the heart of the work is talking about kindness. What does it mean to be kind? Why is kindness so difficult? What does kindness look like? Throughout our community.
Sure.
It's really, Ben's bells is about wrestling with some of this stuff.
Yeah, of course.
What I've learned over these last 18 years is that there is a tremendous amount of goodwill out there. There's a tremendous amount of kind intention.
Yes.
But we struggle sometimes between our intention to be kind and how we enact it. And we have a lot to learn. And really, Ben's bells is all about thinking deeply about kindness, having these conversations, wrestling with it, and then getting better at putting our kind intention into action. It is fascinating, right? And if we don't know how to talk about something, then we can't engage. And ultimately, Ben's bells is about engaging.
That's right. So, Jeannette, you pride yourself, I gather, on being Ben's mom. And the reason why I say that specifically is I've seen that language in your email signatures. I've seen it floating around on other documents, other outward-facing materials you have. You talked a little bit about that, but tell me a little bit more about sort of how the pride of being Ben's mom sort of governs your overall outlook on life.
Wow, Shar, that is a question that people don't ask me. And I really, really am grateful for you asking that question. I really am. I think, being a parent is a completely life-changing. I mean, that so underestimates what it really is like, right? It's
Sure.
just such a world changer. And, just like every parent, I have these two kids, and, they drove me crazy, and I was busy and all this stuff. And, but with all that craziness that comes with being a parent, it was my identity.
Yeah.
It was sort of, if you have to sort of choose your identity, it was sort of on the top of my list.
Yes.
And then after Ben died, I learned so much about myself and about people and about community and about grief and about our community and our the dominant culture, at least, sort of resistance to engage in talk around grief and that sort of thing. Sure. And so I guess it sort of became one of my almost a little bit of a rebellion, that I was not going to be silenced about my grief. People could tell me, and people don't tell you this directly, right? They don't say, don't talk about that, it's too painful.
Right.
They, through their language, they, say things like, they try to put a silver lining. They say things like, at least you have another son, and at least this, and you should this, and you should that. And,
Right.
I'm the mother of a child who died, and it's really a big part of who I am.
Yes.
I don't center that all the time. I mean, Ben's bells is very centered, but Ben's death isn't always very centered. Right. But at the same time, I'm really, really who I am because of this experience. Sure. And proud to be his mom, proud to be Matthew's mom. Mm-hmm. I also have two daughters who we adopted after Ben's death, right. Lisa and Mika. Proud to be their mom as well. And it really, really continues to be a really important part of my identity.
Certainly, yeah. Thank you for sharing that as well, because 18 years later in Ben's Bells, and then 21 years later, since sort of Ben was on this earth, and then his sad passing, I'd have to imagine it might get easier, maybe, but it's never easy. Maybe in some cases, if that makes sense. I don't know, but
Yeah. Do you want my analogy?
please.
I talk a lot with grieving people, especially grieving parents, because I really believe that people who are grieving the death of somebody they love need all the support we can get,
Sure.
and we also need sort of hope at the same time, right?
That's right.
And so my analogy is that, if you're out of shape and you go to the gym and you lift a 100-pound barbell, whatever, and it's heavy because you're out of shape. But then you work really hard and you train and you rest well and you eat well and you do all the things you have to do. A year later, you can pick up that 100 pounds
Yes.
and it feels lighter, but it's still the same
Still
weight.
the same weight.
And for me, I'll speak for myself. That's how grief is.
Interesting.
It is the same weight, the same loss, the same sadness as 18 years ago, but I have been working out really hard for 18 years, really hard. And I don't sort of try to underestimate how much work I put in, because I worked hard, right?
Yeah,
And
of course.
so this idea that time just fixes things, I push back on a little bit. I went to counseling. I had supportive friends and family. I learned a lot. I made mistakes. I cried a lot. I did all of these things that I needed to do, just sort of flex my grief muscle and learn how to carry this.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things for me that grief has given me is sort of a powerful humility.
Right.
It is, and I put powerful in front of it because I think people think humility is a weakness. But it's really given me a humility about being a human and about suffering as a human. And in that humility, I'm able to connect with people in such a different way than I could before. I never ever say I know how you feel to anyone who's suffering, because I really don't. But I do have a different ability, I think, to sit with people in pain, to listen to people in pain, to support people in pain, because I understand.
That's right.
Just the need, the social need we have to hold each other during these times.
That's right. So be kind, right? Now that is literally everywhere. Anybody who visits the website of Ben's Bells will see that you have sort of I guess what you can call a testimonials section, where you'll see people comment from literally all over the country, talking about where they may have seen the bell, where they may have seen the sticker, and sort of submitting their own particular experiences and perspectives. It's definitely here in Tucson for sure, definitely here in Arizona. Talk about the origins of that term, be kind, and the decision to have it centered in the way that it's centered.
Yeah, well, I think that the mission of Ben's Bells, just came out of the story I already told you about, just really understanding kindness in a different way.
Sure.
And then, Ben's Bells had this sort of momentum going, and be kind very quickly became sort of the obvious, motto, the slogan for Ben's Bells. As we grew, people want, you can only find a Ben's Bell, right? You can't just buy a Ben's Bell, but
Right.
People wanted something. And so early on it became, here we're creating a symbol that can actually be powerful. Symbols are so powerful, right?
Yes. Yes.
So we had, the flower shape of our logo is actually a shape of the Ben's Bell. So we were able to sort of create that, print the first batch of stickers, and those started showing up on cars around town. But whenever I would see one, I would sort of speed up and wave, because it would always be somebody I knew, right? My friends had on their car. And I remember the first time I sort of sped up and looked, and it was a stranger, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's spreading beyond just my own sort of circle. So I think that the be kind became sort of this, it's a little provocative, right? So it's a command, right? Be kind,
be kind.
Right? It's not, but at the same time, it's, it provokes a lot of conversation.
Yeah, of course.
Which is really what for me, what I want it to do.
That's right.
So one of my big sort of things what I preach about Ben Spells is that kind is not the same as nice.
Okay.
And that in our dominant culture, we, especially women my age, were sort of socialized to be nice, be nice, keep everything comfortable, sweep problems under the rug, don't say anything controversial.
Right.
We were taught not to talk about race, religion,
Sure.
politics, grief, don't talk about those things because you don't want anyone to be uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And so really the messaging around Ben Spells is like, that is not kindness. That's nice. That's, keeping things neat and tidy, but really kindness is about the greater good. Kindness is about what we do to behaviors that we do to help each other, to benefit each other, to lift each other up.
Of course.
And so that messaging came around really early in Ben Spells, but it has really allowed us to create conversation, especially right now where the world is really sort of upping our game on our motivation and willingness to speak about race and racism. It's really interesting to see people's response to the Be Kind message, because some people feel like kindness doesn't have any part of that conversation.
Sure.
Whereas other people are like, oh, it's totally about kindness. And really having those conversations is the point, right? It's about, if kindness was a beach ball, Ben Spells' job is to keep that beach ball in the air, keep that conversation going, keep people asking themselves, what does kindness have to do with systemic racism? What does kindness have to do with all of these issues that we are dealing with as a community? Also, what does kindness have to do with how I treat myself and my intimate, my close ties, my interpersonal relationships?
Sure.
But also, what does kindness have to do with me in the systems that I live in as well?
Yeah, sure. And it's funny you say that, because that was going to be my next question. So that's actually a great segue. Yes, you tackled two of my next questions in there. So I'm just going to ask you to extend a little bit.
Okay.
We'll go one by one. Because you're speaking of kindness, right? So speaking of kindness in particular, in my world, which you find yourself in as well, we actually don't talk a lot about, like you're saying, kindness as it relates to social justice matters, put it that way. In fact, there are some practitioners out there, as you sort of articulated already, that would argue against this idea of kindness in the conversations of social change, social justice, and that actually subverts the work of justice and accountability that needs to be had. I think about, back in the 60s, the old Governor George Wallace, who was extremely racist. The idea of approaching somebody like him with kindness, when you first hear it, might be a little off-putting. And as you start sharing about kindness, what I'm hearing is that it might be designed or most effective as a proactive measure rather than a reactive measure. So tell me about all of that. Tell me about where you actually think its place is in those conversations around racism, sexism, all the isms. And then talk to me about if you actually believe that it's proactive and not reactive, and what happens if you're faced with a reactive situation.
Great. I love the way you frame that. I guess where I start is that we have to think about what it is that we're fighting for, right? What does the world look like where people do get treated with kindness regularly, right? Where kindness is just part of who we are, what we do every day, which means we're looking out for each other. We're taking care of each other. We're taking care of ourselves. And I think ultimately that's what all we're asking for, right? Yeah. Isn't that what we want? I mean, that's if there was real equity, right? If there was real equality, if there was that's what the world would look like. So I guess that's the place where I start, which is what are we fighting for? People of color are not fighting to take over the world. People are fighting to be treated well, right? To enjoy the same opportunities, to that's what women want too. That's what so it's first of all, that story, think about kindness there, because really it's not what we want. Is that we want to be able to take care of our families, we want to be able to go to the park, we want to be able to drive our car across the town without being harassed. We want this is really what we want.
Sure.
So then as a proactive force, I think that kindness is really about understanding that kindness is about connecting with each other.
Sure.
And that when we are working in a very, within a group of people who are just like us, we might be better at it because we sort of know the expectations in that setting better. But proactively, we can learn about other groups of people, right?
Sure.
So if I want to be an ally, if I want to be an active anti-racist, I need to learn some stuff in
Sure.
order to be able to do kindness in those spaces. As far as reactively, that's where I think those conversations get really interesting, and I'm interested in studying. Does kindness always have to be motivated, by a certain thing, or can anger motivate kindness? I think anger can motivate kindness, right? So, I could argue, maybe you could too, that protests are kind, right?
Okay.
People out in the street protesting. It doesn't mean necessarily being kind to an individual, that political leader or whatever, but what actions am I doing that are benefiting the greater good?
Sure.
And that is kindness, right? So if I am protesting, if I am contacting my senators, if I am doing the work to be an anti-racist, if I am doing those things, those behaviors are kindnesses. So I guess what I am asking, and what I expect of myself, is to really wrestle with these things, right? And then
Sure.
and then be able to say, what does kindness look like in this place right now,
That's
right?
right.
So does kindness look like me protesting? Well, yep, I can argue that it absolutely does. Does kindness look like me boycotting? Well, maybe yes, it does. So what does it look like? But it's taking a deeper processing, and that's what
Sure.
we're asking. So from all your school too, that our brain can process very peripherally, sort of
Mm-hmm.
superficially, like
Mm-hmm.
squirrel, like here's a squirrel right here, and we do that a lot, and we have to do that a lot because we're bombarded by information.
Right.
But I think what we're being called to do is really process deeply about what does it mean to be a good citizen today? What does it mean to be, proactively involved in our communities in a way that is good?
Yes.
And I argue that kindness has a big role in that. But kindness is not the niceness and the fluffy rainbows and butterflies that sometimes we think kindness is.
Which leads to my next question. When I hear those two in your explanation of them, is I hear kindness as something that's intrinsic and niceness as something that's extrinsic. So essentially,
Mm-hmm.
I'm hearing I'm hearing kindness being something that's done for us and that's driving us, and that's really the core of the individual. We're kind people, or you're a kind person, and your kindness is what is infectious when I'm feeling. Being nice is really for you and less for me. It's performative almost. I'm being nice because I am in a situation that calls for it. However, if I was in a different circumstance, this may not be who I am. Do I have a decent read on that?
Oh, I love that.
Okay.
I love it. I mean, I'm going to write down exactly the words you just said. Yeah. So niceness, sort of bottom line, isn't super honest, right? It's not super honest. So I think that there are two main ways that we can think about niceness. So niceness can be really manipulative.
Okay.
Right. So you can have, maybe, bad intentions, and you can behave nicely to sort of manipulate and cover up your bad. So you can smile and be polite, and then, pass policy that hurts a ton of people. Right.
That's right.
So, or you can, smile and be polite, and then, go and talk about someone behind their back or whatever. Over here, that performative piece is that sort of that way that niceness can be about pleasing, about, and there's a lot of that. Of pleasing sort of culture, right? Where I'm not gonna say anything that'll make anybody upset. And so both of those nice ways that we can be nice are just not honest.
Sure.
So kindness should reduce stress and make things better, at least in the longer term, whereas niceness can actually create more stress.
Yeah.
Right.
Gotcha.
So like if I'm a boss and there's a problem with this colleague of mine and I just want to be nice, I don't want to really directly address the problem because it's uncomfortable and I don't want them not to like me. And so I put off addressing the problem and stuff. The problem gets worse and worse. It causes more stress. It ends up being, just such a worse situation because I was nice.
Right.
So like nice is sort of, I heard a quote before, a niceness is the enemy of leadership, right? Where kindness would actually sit with that person and say, this is hard, but we're going to talk about it. And the reason we're going to talk about it is, I believe in you and we can do better. And what do we need to do? And kind of support, kindness is going to wrestle with it. And hopefully that builds trust, right? You're acknowledging, you're connecting and potentially working together to get somewhere better.
Yes.
So, but then, this conversation is nuanced too, right? Because there are times when kindness to yourself will need to trump kindness to someone else. Obviously, if I'm in a situation where I don't feel safe, I have to protect myself. So self-kindness is going to trump doing something to help this other person or whatever. Sure. So it's a nuanced conversation, but that's exactly the point.
That's right. That's right.
That we need to have those nuanced conversations
and engage them critically. Yeah, for sure.
Right.
Lovely answer, and I'm really enjoying this time that we're discussing, and we're really going in depth, which is great.
Can we go 2 or 3 hours?
Right. The conversation around kindness, like I said, is not really talked about in this way in the field. And so I love hearing about it. And I really want to ride it out as much as possible because I think there's something here that's worthwhile in terms of the discussion. Whether or not people want to apply it, is, like you said, is up to them. That's not really your place or my place to really force people to operate. But I do think it's something worth listening to here. I want to take it back earlier to the conversation where you talked about women your age from your generation were taught and brought up in a way to really be nice and be kind and behave in a particular way that followed in that realm to not make people uncomfortable, to not maybe be viewed as problematic. So my critical question for you, Jeannette, is, do you think your approach to the work of being kind is safe for you because it still sits you in that, maybe that ostensible box of, here's a woman, she's taking a kind approach? Or do you feel like you're able to create some space of liberation and empowerment of some form that allows you to be subversive and really tackle the issues like racism, sexism, homophobia, that, transphobia, Islamophobia, that make people uncomfortable? Do you see yourself being able to separate from that image, even though the message you present may be seen as right inside of that box as well still?
I love it. Yeah. And I do think that some people think that that's, what it is that kindness is still this fluffy thing. And that those people are are processing it more peripherally, more surface level. But whenever we get a chance to go deeper with people, it gives me using this lens gives me an opportunity to push boundaries too with folks in a way that I think that makes them actually willing to listen. Mm-hmm. I think one of the big problems we have as a culture is this idea that it's the thought that counts, right? It's the thought that counts. And so getting to have conversations with people about intention versus impact is, I think, is really exciting. Mm-hmm. I've struggled, and I'm sort of still uncovering the ways that that my upbringing has, all the ways that I've incorporated white supremacy and the ways that the patriarchy has affected me, and all, I'm constantly still uncovering that stuff, as probably we all are, if we're into doing that kind of thing. Sure. But I appreciate that the lens of kindness allows me to talk about some of this stuff in a way that allows people to hear it.
Yes.
And what I've learned is that I've been able to get in with some audiences that I know there's no way I would have gotten in with it otherwise, right? Sure. And so I'm able to get in front of people who are like, kindness, yay, come talk to us about kindness. And I'm able to say, talk about intention versus impact. And I can say things like, after Ben died, people said things to me that I know they thought were kind, and it hurt like hell. Yeah. And this is why, right? So this intent impact gap. And then from there I can say, white people do this to people of color all the time. You know, we say things that we think are kind,
Yep.
and they're not, right? And here's why we need to work harder to make sure that, so what I'm saying to them is, I'm assuming you're coming from a kind place, but here's how much learning we need to do in
Yeah.
order to make our kind intent match the
That's
actual impact
That's
outcome.
right.
You know, how does it affect people's lives? So that conversation, while it doesn't seem like it's, you know, totally, you know, rebellious or out there, is actually a really important conversation to be having with folks.
Certainly.
And so the frame of kindness allows me to go there.
Sure.
You know, certainly, you know, some people will unfollow me or, you know, write me off when I say something they don't, that they think is political or whatever. I've really pushed back on this idea that talking about racism is political, or
Mm.
talking about grief is political, or, you know, talking about, I think people use that, don't be political about anything that's uncomfortable.
Right.
So, so I push back on that. And sometimes, you know, people, I've made some people, you know, not interested in hearing from me anymore.
I think we all have at some point.
There are other people that still are. And so if I can sort of, you know, make some headway, and really I'm just, you know, the biggest message is there's so much to learn about us as social creatures, and about how we interact with each other, and about how we communicate with each other, and about how we do kindness. There's so much to learn.
There is, and this conversation has been a fantastic introduction, and I say that because, again, this concept is very new. The relationship you're making here to a lot of this field, and so this is a great primer, and I think it has a lot of promise. You and I actually talked one time offline about there's a woman out there who's actually trying to make this connection between the two, and so it may not be as new as I'm thinking it might be, but I definitely think that you, as the agent of this particular perspective, is going to really take it to the next level. Jeannette, as we close out, I'm interested in this final take. So you recently, within the last maybe couple of years, sort of vacated your space as executive director of Ben's Bells and sort of shifted into the chief kindness officer role, which is how you and I connected. The move seems to be a pretty significant move, right? Or at least a noticeable one, if nothing else. So it begs the question, you know, sort of what propelled you to sort of make that move, and have you given any thoughts to life after Ben's Bells?
Thanks for that question too. I have, yes. So I am a teacher. You know, before Ben died, I was a teacher at the university, and am very interested in teaching and research and learning. And I think my best work is with people, and encouraging people to learn and wrestle, and helping people, you know, frame things. I think that's where my talent lies and where my passion lies. So that's how Ben's Bells started out for me. But of course, as it gets bigger and bigger, and the executive director was an administrator, right? So we had, you know, all these employees and different locations, and it was business, and I was running a business, which is not my, you know, love or necessarily my best skill set. So so I knew for a long time, and we as an organization talked for a long time, like what will we do when I'm not the executive director, because I knew I didn't want to be the executive director. So we did, for years, we did work around, you know, me making sure that I was letting go of things and people were learning things, and we did that for a long time. And then we were sort of preparing for this to happen, but I ended up having sort of a streak of 3 major family issues hit. And I had to say to our board and to our staff, you know, let's start the process now, because I need to focus on my family. And so we did that, and went through a really, you know, long process to find somebody. And, you know, and I think it's going really well. I feel great about it. My life afterwards, or right now, I'm focusing on school. I'm focusing on getting a lot of things written down for Ben's Bells, a lot of the social science written down, that sort of thing. And then I imagine, you know, doing this kind of work, probably in organizations and probably in healthcare. I really am interested in organizational climate and culture, as I know you are too.
Mhm.
And how do we create organizations that allow people to thrive? And I just think there's a lot there. And I think healthcare is one of those incredibly important spaces, incredibly diverse spaces. People are, going through some of the hardest things in their life in these spaces, and I'm just attracted to work in hospitals and that sort of thing. So
Sure.
I still have 3 years of school left, and as you
Okay.
know, when you're a student, you learn so much so fast that
So quickly.
you change focus and stuff as you go along. So I'm not sure exactly what it will look like, but I will definitely continue in this kindness realm in some fashion, most likely working in healthcare.
Well, great. Yeah, that's the world needs you, the work needs you. So
Oh,
that's
right back
fantastic.
at you, Gerard.
All right, Jeannette, thanks so much for joining us on the chopping block. Before we go, let the people know where they can get in touch with you. Do you have anything out? Do you have any publications, any maybe podcasts of your own, your website? Just let the world know how they can get in touch with you.
Definitely. So Ben's Bells is at bensbells.org, and you can learn a lot there and engage with the work we're doing at Ben's Bells there. I'm just starting my own little website this summer, so that should be up soon, and that's jmareconsulting.com. And my last name is spelled Mare with a little accent over the E, J Mare Consulting, although the accent is not on the URL. So I'll be putting everything there. I do not have my own podcast, but I have been on several, so I can put those there. But I just really look forward to more collaboration with people like you and other people around the community who are doing such good work. And I think as long as we keep these, keep moving and keep these conversations going and keep wrestling with this stuff, that we can make change.
Sounds wonderful. Thanks so much, Jeannette. And thank you all for joining. Sherrod Robbins, Jeannette Mare. You're with the Chopping Block at visceralchange.org.